taxpayers are really getting taken advantage of on the front end as far as how much they're paying to get this money, to borrow this money for school construction. And so I submitted this letter on January 25th, which is Exhibit A to your packet. And obviously your packet is for you to take and digest on at your leisure or line your birdcage if you so desire. But my premise in my letter was that the capital appreciation bonds are only one side of the horror story with regard to public financing of school construction presently. My premise was that taxpayers are paying too much on the front end to borrow the money by using these capital appreciation bonds. But the argument I laid out in my January 25th letter was that taxpayers are then being taken advantage of a second time by paying too much on the back end for the construction that's built and funded by those dollars. So basically, they pass the bonds to get a bucket of money, and then they do projects using different delivery systems with that money. And my contention is that the manner in which they're doing some of these processes, i.e. with non-competitive bid lease-back, does not ensure that the taxpayers' dollars go as far as possible. And so my contention is, if you only have a finite bucket of money from your bond proceeds, and if you pay 5 or 10% more to build something, or you pay 20 or 30% more to build something, then you have to. Then on the back end, by definition, you're going to have 5, 10, 20, or 30% less dollars available to do construction. And therein lies my presentation today, which is that I think that the Taxpayers Association should amend their best practices to require sealed lump sum competitive bidding of school lease-back contracts. And I'll get into what I mean by that, obviously that's my presentation. But let me start out by saying, and everyone be clear, I am in favor of lease-back construction for school districts. Lease-back construction for school districts has been around since the 1950s. It's authorized in the Education Code. It's currently numbered as 17400 through 17429. Back in the 50s, it had a couple of different numbers that have changed over the years. And essentially, the statute back in the 50s said that lease-back is a method of financing school construction. It can be used when a school district does not have all the money necessary up front to do the work, but they need to build a project. And it came about because under California's Constitution and financing laws, a public agency can't spend in the current year more money than it has or will receive. And so the problem back then was you couldn't build a $5 million, back then, $5 million middle school if you only had $1 million of excess revenues in your general fund. And recall back then you didn't have Prop 39 that allowed you to get all these bond proceeds with only a 55% vote. And so school districts were hamstrung. They could not build the facilities that they needed because they had a lack of presently available capital, cash. And so the legislature says, well, you know what we'll do? We'll allow you to enter into a lease-back transaction where someone comes in and makes a proposal and says, you school district, prepare your plans and specifications. Define what it is you want. Get those plans and specifications approved by the California Division of State Architects, which is required for every single school construction project. No project can be awarded, no contract can be awarded for a school construction project until the plans and specifications have been reviewed by the Division of State Architect and approved. So by definition, prior to awarding a contract, you know exactly what you're going to build and you know exactly how you're going to build it. And so under lease-back, they said, okay, you take those DSA-approved plans and specs. In a public board meeting, you announce your intention to solicit proposals for the building of those and the financing of them by way of lease-back. And so you basically have to announce, and this is one of the slides later on in my presentation, you have to say what you want to build, what's the minimum amount you're going to pay for it, how long are you going to pay for it, what's the length of your lease term. I think it's a maximum of 35 years. Don't hold me to that, but it's a long time. It can be 5 years, 10 years. It can be anything. It can be anything up to whatever the statutory limit is. So you have to say how long you're going to be making these payments, and then in what increments are you going to be making these payments? Are you going to pay this rental monthly? Are you going to pay it quarterly? Are you going to pay it annually? let's assume for the sake of discussion, you're gonna pay it annually, over 20 years, all right? And you announce that in your solicitation for proposals. And so, after you give public notice and invitation to bids, and you wait 3 weeks, any interested contractors, developers, financiers are able to submit proposals to the school board, sealed proposals, that say, I will build your school building for X amount of dollars. And the other guy says, I'll build it for Y amount of dollars. The other guy says, I'll build it for Z amount of dollars. And the school board is obligated under the statute to award it only to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. And so that was the way that leaseback had been done from the 50s until about 10 years ago. And over time, it became less and less prevalent because alternative financing mechanisms came up, namely bonds. And so school districts no longer had to enter into these long-term financing transactions. They could just go out, pass a bond, get a pot of money, do traditional design bid build, which is required under the public contract code, solicit bids, award the lowest responsive, and be off to the races. But maybe 10, maybe 15 years ago, someone came across this old leaseback legislation and says, hey, you know, we could use this, and we could interpret this to say you don't have to use competitive bidding. We could focus on this one section between 400 and 429. We could focus on 406 because the language in there is sort of ambiguous and could be construed to say, without competitive bidding, a school board can award it to whoever they want to. And the race was on. And that was the spark that has lit the fire over the last 10 to 15 years that has become leaseback construction. And so a whole cottage industry has grown up around this. And so there's architects, there's consultants, there's contractors that participate in raising bond money and presenting at the Coalition for Adequate School Housing cash, and they promote this leaseback as an alternative delivery method. And so let's get into our presentation, which is, remember, let's go back. The purpose of competitive bidding is to ensure compliance with the bidding statute, provide all qualified bidders the opportunity to bid, and to eliminate fraud, favoritism, corruption in the awarding of contracts. Basically making sure that public contracts are awarded to the public monies are spent as efficiently as possible. That's here, the third slide here. Purpose of lump sum sealed bidding is to require governmental entities to open up. It maintains integrity in the process because of the risk with which, that's the second bullet point, because of the risk with which the purposes set forth in Public Contract Code 100 can be surreptitiously undercut. There must be strict requirements. And traditionally, the third point, this is a very important point on this slide. Traditionally, Taxpayers Association has always advocated for fair and open competition, lowest responsive bidder, competitive bidding. Why? Because our interests are the taxpayers' interests. We want to make sure that the taxpayers are getting the best bang for their buck. One of the reasons why competitive sealed bidding, as I'm advocating, is good is that it requires objective evaluation and award of contracts rather than subjective evaluation and award of contracts. My contention is if you have to award based upon lowest responsive bid, or you can always choose not to award. You don't have to. You can open up all the bids, you can see who's low. If you don't like that person, you can say, you know what, I'm going to reject all bids, I'm going to put it back out on the street. And let's do it again, all right? So, but when you don't have that process, when you have a subjective award process where it's up to one or more people to decide who gets this, anytime you have subjectivity, you have the opportunity for fraud, favoritism, corruption, influence, i.e. the situation that you probably saw here recently in the news up at Camp Pendleton. There's a contracting officer, and he was recently arrested and indicted for basically shaking down contractors, saying, look, if you want to work here at Camp Pendleton, I'm the godfather, and I usually get a small percentage of whatever contracts get awarded, and if you pay me, you'll get the contract and things will go good. If you don't pay me, you won't get this contract, and whatever other contracts you have will go bad. Okay? So, that's back to then why that could never happen under sealed competitive bidding. So, I've already gone through sort of a summary of leaseback. Oh, and you know, we all read the paper. There's a litany of articles here that call into question. Excuse me. You know, and that's all the attachments to my handout here is all of the recent, over the last year, indictments, corruption, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why I'm arguing that in a leaseback transaction, there's two contracts. There's the site lease whereby the school district who has the schoolhouse, they lease their property over to the contractor. The contractor pays them $1, and in return for that dollar payment, the contractor gets the right to occupy that space. The second lease is whereby the school district leases that property back from the contractor, presumably when the improvements have been done. And it's under that second lease that the school district pays for the cost of construction and pays for the cost of financing. So there's been a resurgence of competitive leaseback without competitive bidding. This is what I said. This is my page 8, which is they assert that they don't need to advertise for bids. They're relying upon Education Code 17406. And this is what a legal issue right now that we have with some litigation is, what is the meaning of that underlined phrase, notwithstanding 417? My opponents assert that that underlined phrase exempts them from the competitive bidding that I'm advocating with regard to 17417. And so 17417, you know, lays out a number of requirements for notice, opportunity for everybody to bid, award to only lowest responsive bidder. So, and you're right, you guys did do your analysis, and you did realize that leaseback, in the way in which it's being done right now, does come with some potential drawbacks, and it is subject to some criticisms as far as favoritism in the award of contracts. In fact, in your April 2011 document, you said, we recognize that there is the potential to generate distrust among the public. In fact, we find that the procurement practice of these districts, Southwest in particular, have come under increased public and media scrutiny. Given the potential for increased public distrust, school districts should take additional measures to promote transparency and ensure that public contracts are not influenced by donations. And so, how prophetic was that? Because remember, you said that back in 2011. What blew up and happened in 2012? After you guys had made your recommendations about what the best practices should be. And your current best practices don't include a requirement of sealed competitive bidding. They contain certain suggestions, but not necessarily a requirement. And so, here are your, current suggestions. And so, however, notwithstanding your guys' best efforts, your organization, my organization, Carlin is also a member of the Salem County Taxpayers Association. Our organization has come under criticism from others, other taxpayer organizations, other individuals, saying that the practices that you have, while they sound good, are not effective to prevent certain interests from profiting upon the taxpayers. And so it's as a result of that I would suggest to you, and I would move.
Hold the move.
All right.
You're a member, you can, I think you can move, you can't vote, I suppose.
No, I would move. And actually, I would like to move and get a second, and that would then trigger the discussion.
We'll do that after the next presentation.
Sounds good.
The whole subject will be subject to consideration after, are you finished?
I have 24 seconds,
Yeah,
I
you
yield.
sure do, yeah.
Thank you.